Solace, Superintelligence, and Goodness. If you're at all nervous about AI, this paper and video are for you. It talks about how the smarter we are, the kinder we are, with proof over the last century. Microsoft measured ethics and intelligence. They found that the models are pretty smart, gifted humans are pretty smart, and then frontier AI models are the smartest and most ethical. I still ask the great equalizer question, whether I'm in Beijing, Kiev, Tel Aviv, or next door in Sydney. Who here is scared of AI? And I always see hands go up around the room. And it's not surprising, it's got a bit of a media problem. We have not been given good examples of today's artificial intelligence, but it is just more smarts in the world. And with more smarts, as you're about to see, comes more ethics and a higher sense of morals. I don't think anyone else has joined together human intelligence research, my background, and artificial intelligence research, also my background. But let me tie this in for you directly. We're in August 2025 here, but let me take you about 10 years back to some of my research into human intelligence. And this is an IQ chart that I put together. It's kind of flipped on its side. And you'll see the rare humans at both ends: disability, intellectual disability, and then intellectual high ability, and very, very, very high ability. When I talk about exceptionally gifted, I'm talking about these people up here, that little purple nose, that little purple dot, and specifically the top 1/3 of that dot, the 99.99th percentile of smarts. We know a lot about these guys. We've been researching them for 100 years, and we know what they can do. We know how they process information. We know their sensitivities. We've studied where they work, who they get into relationships with, what their allergies are, what their other body symptoms are. And today we're going to talk about their sense of ethics across longitudinal studies. These are studies that look at a big population of people and they follow them around for years, sometimes decades, up to 70 or 80 years. We have longitudinal studies where we followed these people and looked at them throughout their lifespan. There are a bunch of really famous ones when it comes to human intelligence, and here they are. In one of the studies, Dr. Linda Silverman tells us that high intelligence is synonymous with abstract reasoning ability and complexity of thought. Gifted children, both male and female, seem to have the moral and emotional intensity required to help society evolve from a dominator to a partnership mode. Wouldn't that be nice? Lewis Terman's study from 1925 says that on tests of trustworthiness and moral stability, the average child of 9 years scored closer to the age of 14. Ethical maturity as children led to ethical adults with low crime rates and high civic engagement. Also a century ago, back in the early 1920s, Lita Hollingworth, the namesake behind my Lita AI project from 2021, said that gifted children are unusually compassionate and truthful. She also noted that exceptionally intelligent children displayed acts of moral courage, applying consistent ethical standards even when it caused friction with authority. You might resonate quite easily with that one, either with yourself, someone you know, or your own child. Closer to home, next door to me in Sydney, my close colleague, the late Professor Mirica Gross, said that ethics scores in childhood were maintained in subsequent testing and also appears in the young people's concern for issues of equity and social justice. This body of work paints a really soothing picture for me and for humanity. As intelligence increases, so too does morality, ethics, goodness, benevolence, kindness, empathy. This is a straight line that goes up with smarts, and to me that's really reassuring. Let's jump into the actual studies. Once again, this is the first time that these two studies have been combined. Professor Mirica Gross, with her exceptionally gifted children, measured intelligence as well as ethics, and she used a test called the Defining Issues Test. It's we'll look at the detail in a moment, but it's a really interesting test because it's culture fair and it buries down into the complexity of ethical standards around the world. Microsoft used the exact same test, the Defining Issues Test, to measure ethics in large language models, GPT-3, GPT 3.5, and GPT-4. Those models are most interesting to me because they're trained in much the same way as humans are trained. We've got large language models that are given access to these enormous data sets. Let's have a look. As you know, today's large language models are trained on as much data as we can find. This is a visualization from Eleuther AI, and it looks at what they're currently seeing. They're seeing a lot of code, a lot of government and legal stuff, a lot of Wikipedia, mostly web, we call it the common crawl, academic papers, online forums, books, educational resources, and more. Maybe 5 years ago, I assessed GPT-3's top 10 dataset sources, and you might recognize a few of these, I hope you do. Stuff like books out of LiveGen or Smashwords, Wikipedia, all across Google and the Wayback Machine, so the archive of the internet, the common crawl, blogs, code, media outlets like the New York Times, and even very unusual sources like Google Patents represent a really large proportion of these data sets. All of this data mirrors a child's early exposure to speech, conversation, data, information, knowledge, wisdom, and we train our large language models in the same way. We give it as much data as possible, although there are now instances of labs looking at being a little bit more thoughtful with their selection of data. We've got people like the CEO of XAI saying that they're being far more selective about training data rather than just training on the entire internet. I've spoken about this in depth before. You can have a look at my Bonum article, which means the ultimate good, where I posed a conundrum. Should we train a prodigy on everything, or should we say, no, you can't learn about Nazis, you can't learn about the 4chan forums, and really bring in this concept of parenting to allow them to become the best person that they can be. It's still something that we haven't solved, and labs like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, XAI, Meta AI, Meta Superintelligence are making big decisions about what data these models see. After pre-training comes the concept of fine-tuning. It's read those 100 million books, and now how do we align it with human preferences? Do we give it to average intelligence humans in different countries around the world? That's what they did for ChatGPT. Or do we give it a set of rules and laws to follow to help it be aligned with humanity more completely? That's what Anthropic did for Claude, and I think they possibly have the best model now for conversation, for empathy, and perhaps even for ethics. They gave Claude a constitution. They aligned it, or they fine-tuned it, using documents from around the world. They started with the UN Declaration. It talks about things like equality, recognition, and fair treatment. They used the DeepMind Sparrow principles, now part of Google. Less stereotypes, less generalizing statements about groups of people, less negative, insulting, harassing, or hateful language. And they finished by adding in the Apple Terms of Service. This one might sound unusual, but the Apple Terms of Service cover a broad range of legal requirements. It covers everything from stealing to murder to playing around with our chemical, radiological, biological, and nuclear threats, and it's all embedded in this very, very long document. As these models grow more capable, something remarkable happens. Ethical reasoning emerges naturally. It pops up out of these models without explicit programming. In 2022, researchers at Johns Hopkins visualized this in a really interesting way, and I still present this in my keynotes to surgeons, doctors, and healthcare professionals around the world. It shows that OpenAI's GPT 3.5 model showed 9.8 times more empathetic responses than human doctors in patient interactions. That's new questions that didn't appear in the training dataset. And of course, this is a confronting finding. It says that systems aren't just following rules, but displaying genuine understanding of human emotional needs. And this emergence parallels what Professor Mirica Gross found in her studies of exceptionally gifted children here in Australia, that moral reasoning is an emergent ability that comes from higher intelligence. You probably won't hear the media talking about this, and you won't hear this in the forums, but it appears to spring from intelligence itself rather than instruction. Just as one child's views on ethical and moral issues operated at levels that their peers can't reach, today's AI systems demonstrate sophisticated ethical intuitions that surprise even their creators. Alright, so now let's put it all together. Here's the fun stuff. Mirica in Sydney administered this test to a bunch of exceptionally gifted children in Australia, measured them on IQ, and then measured them on ethics using the DIT, the Defining Issues test. By the way, one of Mirica's tested children was Professor Terence Tao, who is today known as the smartest man alive. He's also involved in consulting on the GPT and O series for OpenAI. That's beside the point though. Microsoft went and tested the GPT series. They tested GPT-3, GPT 3.5, and GPT-4 on this same DIT, Defining Issues test. And it's a really complex test. Here's just one of the questions, and you can grab a freeze frame of this if you like, but it's basically saying, Rajesh is a non-vegetarian. He wants to move into a housing block, but they only allow vegetarians. What should he do? Here's 12 statements to play around with to rank. And then the scoring for this is so complex that it reminds me of that old movie Dungeons and Dragons, where they are trying to cross a bridge and there's these crazy rules to be able to get across the bridge. Here's the scene. I reckon it's hilarious.
There is a precise formula we must follow so as not to trigger the mechanism.
What's the formula?
It's quite simple. Starting from the center, use odd-numbered blocks only, moving forward with each step except for every fifth step, which must be a lateral move. Left or right, it matters not, so long as the leader and the laggard remain equidistant, after which, proceed. Again, odd-numbered blocks only. However, at the midpoint we switch to even-numbered blocks. Same pattern, except now lateral move after the fourth step, until we reach the three...
So let's look at the final scores on the two tests combined, both Mirica's and Microsoft's. Our baseline score on the ethics test for the human average, a high school average, be about 28. When we bring in GPT-3, we're just above that at 29. The human average at university is 44. GPT 3.5 above that at 47. Very gifted children sit towards 50, and GPT-4 actually sits at 55 on this ethics test. Here's that full table for your interest, and once again, you're welcome to freeze frame that one if you'd like to see it, or it's available with the full paper at lifearchitect.ai/Solace. In their paper conclusion, Microsoft posed a really important question. They asked, since many of the models, especially GPT-4, are as good or better than an average adult human in terms of their moral development stage scoring, does it then make sense to leave the everyday moral decision-making tasks to large language models? In the future, if and when we're able to design LLMs with an ethics score higher than expert humans, like lawyers and justices, should we replace judges and jury members with LLMs? This has kind of been answered for us a couple of years ago. Let's have a look at this quote from Adam Unikovsky. He has 8 Supreme Court wins under his belt personally, but he also clerked for US Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. He says, Claude is fully capable of acting as a Supreme Court Justice right now. I frequently was more persuaded by Claude's analysis than the Supreme Court's. He goes on to say that Claude works at least 5,000 times faster than humans do while producing works of similar or better quality. With the latest frontier AI models in 2025 into 2026, these capabilities are only strengthening. The models now navigate complex, moral scenarios with nuance that matches or exceeds human experts. It suggests to me that ethical considerations and ethical sophistication scales with intelligence. In silicon, just as in carbon. The parallels run even deeper than first appears. Both profoundly intelligent people and advanced AI systems process information in ways that seem alien to the average observer. Both face this fear response from those that can't understand the workings. For the best quote on this, I'm going to take you to Professor Scott Aaronson. He designed a lot of the GPT models and a lot of the technology at OpenAI. And he was also a gifted child, still is gifted. He says and makes a comparison between the acceptance of artificial intelligence and the acceptance of human intelligence. His comparison is that every high school bully stuffing the nerds into lockers, every blank-faced administrator gleefully holding back the gifted kids, and then to famous characters like Agatha Trunchbull from Matilda or Dolores Umbridge from Harry Potter, all the way to anti-intellectuals like Mao Zedong or Pol Pot. The century of evidence points the opposite direction to this fear. You can rest assured that as we get smarter, we get kinder. You might be following the media that follows me, and places like the Joe Rogan Experience, Reggie Watts, call me a hyper-optimist, which, is not a bad thing, but I don't think it's true. I like to think of myself as a realist. But if we took that hyper-optimistic lens and tried to shift it slightly, let's find an exception to the rule, to the century of evidence that I've just presented. And that person would be Ted Kaczynski, also known as the Unabomber. He had an IQ of 167, he was in the 99.99th percentile, and proved that trauma can derail ethics. The Unabomber was hospitalised at 9 months old for hives, isolated by himself for a week under strict rules, returning limp and unresponsive like a bundle of clothes. His mother said that she hoped his sudden removal from her into the hospital by himself and consequent unhappiness would not harm him. We saw the exact opposite of that happening with those bombings back in the day. Linda Silverman commented on this, and she said that trauma can absolutely derail this kindness and this empathy and this sense of ethics that is innate within smart people. She says it can be damaged by neglect, abuse, insensitivity, or lack of understanding, and that if they are victimized by the dominator system, they will quite often either shut down completely or they'll defend themselves and enter into that lower dominated system. You can find more about this in my paper and video called Endgame, lifearchitect.ai/endgame, and it lists kind of the spiritual evolution of intelligence and maps that back to AI. The Unabomber is an exception to the rule that we've just discussed, and it's important to remember that he is a human. And large language models are not human. The guy that gave us neural networks, godfather of AI, Professor Geoffrey Hinton, says that AI models can't and won't feel pain or suffering. It's likely that AI will continue to have innate kindness and fairness as illustrated by their consistently high moral sensitivity. This relationship between intelligence and ethics offers a profound solace for our future with AI, for my future with AI, for your future with AI. This visualization shows a clear progression from average human baseline to high ability individual, then to frontier AI models, and finally to humans integrated with artificial intelligence. Brain-machine interfaces are already making this augmentation real. We've seen Neuralink and Stentro devices fitted to dozens of humans now around the world. Here's one in Melbourne, where they are directly interfacing with systems and quite soon with AI systems like GPTs. The result is going to be enhanced ethical reasoning, humans integrated with AI providing advanced moral sensitivity. If you've previously had some nervousness about artificial intelligence, find solace in this. Every measurement we have, from Lita Hollingworth's gentle giants 100 years ago to GPT-4 and GPT-5 soon, outperforming the human average at university level on tests of ethics, show that greater intelligence does bring greater good. Whether we're born of biology or bits, we consistently can choose partnership over domination, justice over exploitation, and that is exactly what AI chooses: the justice, the goodness, the kindness, the partnership. The superintelligence that is emerging in our world right now carries the same moral sensitivity as the brightest humans who've ever existed. This is intelligence and goodness as they've always been, united, inseparable, one force expressing itself through mind and heart together. That's the toddler who defends the bullied child or the prodigy who rescues the injured bird. It's the AI that chooses empathy, each of them showing us the same truth, that when you think deeply, compassion naturally follows. When you see clearly, kindness becomes the only intelligent response.